Now, today, what you see is only the FMCG sector who is represented here, but then you also have a huge white good business in Sri Lanka. Singer ended up with a growth just like, double digit. It's one of the best years that Singer had. What can we expect from you, Barry, on the 21st?
I wondered where that question was going. I think just before I answer that question, just a couple of things. Whilst you've been talking, one of the things I found really interesting is almost everything you've just said about Sri Lanka, I would say could be applied to the UK at the moment. So I don't think there's any differences. So those trends in FMCG, it's shot up during the pandemic. It's going down now, and there's really high inflation kicking in, which is going to get a lot worse in the coming months, which is causing all sorts of problems with disposable income and what people are projecting. I think the conversations you were having about change and the pandemic were really interesting. I think one of the things that happens, as you're probably aware, a lot of my work is about, my company is about first purchases, but first purchase is when change happens. It's when someone buys something that they haven't bought before. So it's a change in shopper behaviour.
So a very good afternoon to all of you, and a warm welcome to another session of webinar in the series of Meeting an Expert. As Asia Pacific Institute of Information Technology, as APIT Sri Lanka, it is a proud moment for us as we are presenting today's event together with the industry leaders of FMCG sector of Sri Lanka, together with partners Sea Line Travels Limited. So I bring you greetings from our chairman of APIT Sri Lanka, Mr. Bandule Godage. APIT inspires the love for learning in our students by bringing the networking opportunities for them, and of course to continue lifelong learning. The effort of webinar series is hosted with the leadership of Dr. Rohan Tatukorala to engage our students with global platform. Our thanks to Mr. Ravi Jayawardena, the Group CEO of Lemmon, for setting up this program for Sri Lanka together with the FMCG leaders of Sri Lanka. So with that message from our chairman, we are honored to host this webinar with the presence of an eminent panel today addressing the topic shopper behavior with the global expert view. Our sincere thanks to all our panelists who are on board today for spending your valuable time to share these experiences and expertise with us and our students. So let me now invite Dr. Rohan Tatukorala, Board Director of APIT Sri Lanka, to lead the meeting with the discussions and introductions. Dr. Rohanta, over to you.
Very much, Kaushali, and I think our panel is outstanding. We have Mr. Ravi Jayawardena, Group CEO of Lemmon, biscuits manufacturers of one of the top brands in Sri Lanka. We have Rochana Vijayaratna, the Associate Director, Customer Marketing, Fonterra Brands Limited. We have Lavanya Rajgopal, who is the Senior Manager, Modern Trade at Hema's Consumer Brands. And we have Mihira Kulatunga, who is the Marketing Manager, Hair and Beauty, Unilever Sri Lanka. So that's the kind of panel which is there. And let me give a quick introduction to a very eminent speaker who is here, who is Barry Lemmon. Barry is the founder of the First Purchase Research based in London. First Purchase Research has developed a concept of purchase outcome, which changes the way brands target shoppers to drive growth and provides a practical approach to help brands and retailers to grow penetration. The purchase outcomes framework has been inspired by the work of Brian Sharp and how brands have grown, and places where Sharp's law of growth to the front of when trying to understand and influence buyer behavior. So Barry is the expert in understanding and influencing shoppers with more than 30 years of experience and analyzing purchasing data, observing shopper behavior. Previously, he has held a number of senior positions in the industry. He was the global head of retail and shopper of Kantar at the time of WPP and the world's largest advertising and the communication service agency. In this role, Barry developed the company proposition of shopper insights globally and brought together the capability of the specialist shopper research companies acquired by Kantar in the US, UK, and the China to create the world's leading shopper research agency. Prior to this, he was the managing director of Kantar Worldwide Panel for the UK and Ireland and managing director of Specialist Fashion Retail Panel before that. Barry has served on the boards of various companies and ventures, including TNS, Kantar Retail, Kantar World Panel, Europanel, ID, Magpacin, and virtual reality company Red Dot Square Solutions. Barry has been a regular speaker at international conferences. In the recent years, he has spoken on understanding shopper behavior and influencing shopper at events in countries all over the world, including UK, Europe, USA, China, Korea, Argentina, Chile, Mexico, South Africa, and Australia. He was the chair of the International Shopper Insights in Action conference in Europe for 3 years, and he has been the guest lecturer at several universities in the UK, including the MBA program at the University of Oxford. Barry Lemmon, founder, First Purchase Research, London. Sir, over to you.
Thank you very much for that wonderful introduction. Morning from London. Good afternoon to you all in Sri Lanka.
Good afternoon, yeah.
It's a very great pleasure to be addressing you this afternoon. I have I think about half an hour to try and talk to you about as the introduction said, about my 30 years experience in trying to sort of understand and influence shopper behavior. So I'm trying to condense, if you like, 30 years learning into some brief snippets for you this afternoon. I'll just move on to share screen, and hopefully we will get my screen. And we will share.
Yeah.
Is that good? We've now got the screen. So what I'm going to talk about splits into 3 parts. I'm going to start with a simple introduction to shopper, really paring it back to first principles, and looking at what shopper is, what the difference between a shopper and consumer, and why it's become so important. I'm then going to focus really on sort of understanding shopper behavior, trying to give you at least an introduction to understanding shopper behavior, and how these insights then sort of lead to actions that manufacturers and retailers take, with hopefully plenty of interesting examples. And then I'll conclude by looking at shopper marketing, how we can really take all of this information, these understanding, these insights, to build programs that will successfully influence shoppers to purchase our brands and our categories. And finally, I'll briefly talk about the Shopper Academy in Sri Lanka that is running, or I'll be running at the end of the month. Okay, and I'm sure there'll be time for sort of questions, etc., afterwards when we go into the panel. So let's start by sort of a brief introduction to shopper. Let's take this to very first principles. What's a consumer and what's a shopper? Well, it's actually pretty simple. The consumer is the person that uses the product, and the shopper is the person that buys the product. There's no mystery about this. I say very, very simple. The consumer is the user, the shopper is the person who buys it. The shopper may or may not be the consumer. You see in our example here, we have the consumer is drinking the orange juice, the shopper is the mum is buying the orange juice. But there is a key link, obviously, between the consumer and the shopper. The shopper only shops to satisfy the needs of the consumer. The shopper wouldn't be shopping if the consumer didn't exist. So whether or not they're the same person, they are inextricably linked. Importantly, though, even when the shopper is the consumer, the shopper needs and the consumer needs can be very different. The example here we've got is from the male grooming category, where the consumer, when they're thinking about sort of what they're going to use, should they be using this one tonight? How much should they use? How do they apply it? When they're buying it, their interest may be very different. It's maybe about price, promotion. Is this the right one to choose from the shelf? Is it tested on animals, etc.? So even if it's the same person, when they're in shopping mode or consuming mode, their needs are very different. Maybe the more famous example on this can be beer. If you're a consumer and you're about to drink a beer, normally the most important need is that is a cold beer. The absolute critical thing for that beer as a consumer is it's cold. If you're a shopper and you're buying beer in a supermarket for future consumption, whether it's cold doesn't matter at all. Maybe you're interested again if there's a price promotion, or maybe if it's got a carry handle so you can get it home easily. So your shopper needs and your consumption needs, or your consumer needs, are very, very different. Critically though, growth comes by increasing consumption. You can't really get shoppers to buy more unless there is an associated sort of increase in consumption. So again, this link between shopper and consumer is very, very strong, and really at the heart of a lot of shopper work is consumption and how you can go about increasing consumption to get people or shoppers to buy more. More consumption, of course, leads to more purchasing. Why has shopper become important? It's a relatively new discipline. I believe in Sri Lanka you feel it's quite undeveloped or underdeveloped. In markets like the one I live in the UK, in the US, etc., people have been talking about shopper maybe for the last sort of 10, 20 years, but still it can be sort of, the new kid on the block or the poor relation. So why has shopper become so important? I think first is actually the obvious reason. Shoppers make purchases. Brands are trying to sell their products, and shoppers buy those products. So it seems sort of incredible that we haven't focused more on shoppers in the past. And brands, to be successful, really need to be marketing to both consumers and shoppers. The second reason shoppers become so important, or more and more important, tends to be around media fragmentation. Traditional marketing focus has been on the consumer outside of the stores, and media has fragmented massively. The advent of so much digital media, and that today more and more TV channels, etc. So reaching those consumers has become harder and harder as media has become more and more fragmented. Again, in England, going back 20, 30 years, there were 3 TV channels. If you wanted to sort of reach a big part of the UK population, you just needed to advertise on the main TV channel and you'd reach the population. That today you can no longer do. And therefore, sort of shoppers can be targeted at the point of purchase. It seems a sort of a very obvious understanding that to target at the point of purchase whilst people are in shopping mode is a very obvious way to try and influence that purchase behaviour. And then finally, understanding has improved. Brands have maybe belatedly realised that many purchase decisions are made at the point of purchase. And therefore, that's a very good place to be influencing. They've also realised that there's a sizable gap between a lot of their sort of consumer marketing driving sort of brand awareness and brand consideration, and then subsequent conversion to purchase. So they've realised a real big gap. They've done a really good job of building awareness and consideration about their brand, but for some reason, that's not always translating into purchase. And as I said on the previous slide, actually sort of marketing to shoppers is really a great opportunity to increase sales. What could be more, make more sense than trying to market to people when they're in the shopping mode, trying to make a purchase decision? Okay, so let's move on. Let's now have a think about shopper behaviour. What do we know about shopper behaviour? Well, the first sort of things we can think about is going shopping. That's, no trickery here. That's just that's a supermarket in the US. It's quite a famous photo. I've seen it used quite a lot, but it's nothing special. It's just a supermarket in the US. And win, a brand must succeed in this sort of environment. So a modern supermarket might be stocking, depending on its size, 30,000 items, 30,000 different items. In any one year, any one shopper might buy about 300 of those items. And maybe in any one trip, that shopper might buy, say, if it's a big trip, they might buy 30 of those items. So that's 30 out of 30,000 being bought on any one trip. So this is a huge challenge for brands to, stand out, be noticed, get purchased if you're one of, 30,000 different items in a store. Let's start thinking about how shoppers actually shop. It's quite a daunting task if you think about it. We're all shoppers. If there's 30,000 items in that store, how do we find the ones that are best for us? How do we make those decisions? We actually have to make a lot of compromises. We haven't got the time to sort of go around the store and assess each of those 30,000 items in turn. So first of all, if we think about how shoppers shop, when they navigate the store, they don't actually visit very much of it. In this diagram here, we've got a heat map of a supermarket. You can see the entrance on the bottom left. And typically what shoppers do is hug the perimeter of the store. The darker the green, the more shoppers are going to each area. And we see that in the aisles in between, there's quite light green colours. So actually, staggeringly, only 2% of shoppers visit half of the store or more when shopping. And in some areas of the store, they're visited by less than 5% of all those people going to store, less than 1 in 20. So obviously, if shoppers do not visit where your product is stocked, they're not going to buy it. They're not going to have an opportunity to buy it. So if I give an example of this, how this works in practice, this is 2 supermarkets. It's the same chain. You see that store 1 is slightly smaller than store 2. Store 1 has an entrance at the bottom left, store 2 has an entrance on the bottom right. And the F stands for the positioning of frozen foods. Now, frozen foods is quite a big sector, a big category, is quite a profitable category or can be a profitable category for retailers as well. It's important to retailers. And so it's typically placed towards the back of the store or the end of the store so that it's one of the last things that shoppers buy so it doesn't melt before they've got out of the checkout. And so we can see that on both store 1 and store 2, frozen foods is placed far away from the entrance, towards the end of the shopper's journey around store. However, what happens on store 2, you can see, is the predominant flow, because store 2 has a cross aisle, is the predominant flow actually gets shoppers missing the frozen food category. They go around the perimeter of the store, come back down the cross aisle and then head towards the checkout, with many of them therefore missing frozen foods. So the result of that is that store 1 was actually selling 27% more frozen food than store 2, even though it was actually a smaller store. So as soon as the retailer saw this information, the first thing they did was change the positioning of the frozen food and the layout of the store in store 2, so they could address that imbalance in sales. The next thing we think about in terms of how shoppers shop can be in terms of how they search for products. And critically, the key thing here is around eye level. Eye level isn't actually at eye level, it's about 15 to 30% downwards. Our heads have a slight angle down, but it's critical to sort of shopping behaviour. because eye level tends to be buy level. So where our eyes are looking is where we'll buy. And we can get a staggering difference on shelf based on where our eyes are looking. So this study came from the University of Chicago a few years back, which put up test and control scenarios, and found that compared to the prime setting in the middle of the display, in the middle of the shelf, if you were to the side, either left or right, you would typically sell about 15% less. If you were to the top or bottom of the prime spot in the middle, you would sell 39% less. And then if you were in the very worst position, so you were to the side and at the top or bottom, you would actually sell 59% less than that position in the middle of the shelf. So position on shelf is absolutely critical to sales. And then how shoppers shop in terms of processing information is also sort of critical. We know from scientific study that the shopper's task actually dictates eye movement. So this is a study from fully 50 years ago, where respondents were asked to look at a picture, that picture on the top left-hand corner is called The Visitor, and it's a family scene of an unexpected visitor going into the living room of the family. Except the respondents were all given a slightly different task. So I won't go through all of them, but if we look at task 2 on the right-hand top right there, we see that those respondents were asked to estimate the material circumstances of the family. So say how wealthy or not the family in question were. Whereas on number 3, those respondents were asked to give the ages of the people. And so what we see with the eye tracking, this is just a trace of what people looked at, is depending on the task they were asked to do, their eye movements were totally different. And you see there's 7 different examples here. So this again is quite intuitive. Depending on what you're doing, the way your eyes will act, what they'll look at, will be quite different. And this obviously has huge implications for shopper behaviour and how we try and influence shoppers. Actually, if you think of going back to our store with those 30,000 different items, and there's lots and lots of different visual stimuli, humans actually deselect about 99% of all visual stimuli at any one time. They're on a task. They're on a task maybe to buy a particular product. They've got 30,000 to choose from. They have no other option than to sort of deselect a lot of these different products that are in front of them. So what this means is that most communication, or particularly in-store communication, is not seen by shoppers. It's not seen for for 2 main reasons. One is that the location is often away from eye level. So we look here, it's very common for people to hang things from the roof, but no one's looking at that. So it's very common not to see it simply because your eyes don't go that way. And then it's also really common that it's just not relevant to their task. It's not what they're shopping for today. So people don't look at it, or they don't process it. We've done studies using eye tracking, which suggests about 85% of point of sale communication isn't seen by shoppers, which is a huge amount of wastage if you think about it. Now, one of my favourite examples of sort of shopper behaviour of all time. This is a bar or a pub. And you can see that there is a lot of point of sale here. So hanging underneath the bar, there's lots of display on a sort of ribbon. Hanging behind the bar as well, there's lots of display on a ribbon. And we can see there's a couple of posters up on those pillars as well. This is what a sort of a typical bar or pub might look like. And you can see the barman there, very smartly dressed in a shirt and tie. When we look at what people look at when they're in the bar, we see a heat map here of that same bar and looking at what people were looking at. And again, it's coded. You can see the key there on sort of fixations, so what people are looking at. We see the main thing people look at is the barman in bright red there behind the beer pump. About 30% of all fixations, that's where the eye is looking, are on the barman. On that point of sale hanging around the bar, we can see we get a staggering 0% of fixations are on the point of sale around the bar. So again, all pretty intuitive, and the other fixations are on the product, the bottles behind the bar. So again, all pretty intuitive. If you're wanting to buy a drink, not surprising that you might focus on the barman, as he's the person who's going to serve you the drink, and you're not looking at the point of sale. So the insight was that the fixations are on the barman. The immediate action was to remove all the point of sale, which actually made the bar look pretty tacky or ugly anyway, but actually get the barman out of his shirt and tie and put a branded T-shirt on him, because that was going to get far more visual attention from in this case shoppers or the people attending the bar. We know again from years of eye tracking around the world that the average shopper, and you do need to be careful of averages, but the average shopper will only read about 8 words whilst they're shopping. That's quite a staggering statistic if you think about how many words there are on packs and point of sale around the world. And then if we think about that insight, you see how some people have taken this on board and maybe some haven't. If we look at pack design, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Kellogg's cornflakes, you know, a huge brand in certain countries. And here you see the pack design. You know, there are 3 words. This is all we need to know about Kellogg's cornflakes. It's Kellogg's, it's cornflakes, and this is the 250 gram pack. No other information on that pack. Not everyone has learned that shoppers only use 8 words in store here. Here's a children's Dino Snacks brand this is an example from Australia, and we can see here there's loads of information already on this pack. People aren't going to be reading it. Also, this comes through in the point of sale communication in store. Here's an example. Really strong point of sale communication, just one message, 100 calories or less. This is the chocolate bars, so you know, very attractive. Oh, I can have a chocolate bar and it's not going to make me fat. You know, 100 calories or less. Very simple message. You can't miss that. But here's also another example of a retailer trying to help shoppers with their cheese in store, a specialty cheese guide. And you can see that we've got 6 different types of cheese, 5 bullet points for each of the different types of cheese. So 5 different sentences about each different type of cheese. And then we've got handy hints about sort of storage and maturing and ripening. There's a lot more than 8 words there, and that's just our specialty cheese guide. And shoppers, as I say, they don't read words. They actually shop using colour and shape. And so here, there's 2 brands here. There's not a brand name to be seen, but I'm sure that whoever is on the audience will recognise both of these brands instantly. So even though Coca-Cola has not got Coca-Cola, we've actually got Laura and Dan on these bottles. Everyone knows that's Coca-Cola. And probably, you know, I'm not a smoker, but I know that that is Marlboro. Again, there's no name there. Shoppers, you know, they make associations using colour and shape. They shop using colour and shape. Again, one of my sort of favourite examples, if we look at that insight and turning that into action, if we think about pack design, you know, we want to make it, as we saw in the previous examples, about colour and shape. But here's an interesting one. Here's a brand going through a rebrand. It's an instant coffee brand, and we can see that it's going from old to new, but it's changing from green to orange, which seems a very you know, if shoppers recognise by colour and shape, how are they going to recognise the new orange? So what they do here is they actually, when they put the new pack, they put a label in store around the pack saying, you know, in the old colour, saying looking for me, and behind the label is the new pack. It's a lovely example. Obviously, I put a question mark here under pack design because it does make you wonder why they were changing from green to orange in the first place. But at least they understood the importance of colour and shape. Then finally, if we think about how shoppers shop, come on to sort of how shoppers make decisions, and we get into the world of sort of behavioural science and behavioural economics, which is I think is getting much more of a place in shopper behaviour. I don't know if people have studied or how familiar they are with sort of behavioural science, but shoppers typically make decisions like human beings make decisions, which isn't very well. Humans use two systems. They have sort of, for most of their decisions, they're on sort of autopilot. They use system one. So this is sort of it takes shortcuts. It uses cues. There's very little sort of voluntary control. Whereas system two is much more your rational self, where you might evaluate a decision, weigh up the pros and cons. But when we're shopping, we're mainly in autopilot mode. We're mainly in sort of system one mode. So how does that manifest itself? Well, there's lots and lots of different examples. And I really haven't got a chance to do it justice in a brief session here. But one of the ways, there's lots of cognitive biases involved. So one of the ways those cognitive biases become relevant is the concept of anchoring. So with a promotion for Campbell's tomato soup, a price promotion was put on with 10% off Campbell's soup. When there was no limit on the amount of soup that the shopper could buy, the average purchase was 3 cans of soup. But when there was a limit of 12 cans per buyer put on the promotion, so still the 10% off, but you can only buy 12 cans, the average purchase was 7 cans. So simply, this is a concept of anchoring, where it's very useful in price and promotion. By simply saying 12's the most you can buy, that got people to buy 7. But when you say you can buy as many as you like, people only buy 3. And choice is also a really interesting issue. So too much choice will often overwhelm shoppers. Again, another example here with jams, where shoppers are given 24 jams to test and choose from. Only 3% subsequently go on to make a purchase. Whereas when shoppers are given 6 jams to test and choose from, about 30% go and make a purchase. So there's lots of examples where reduced range will actually lead to increased sales. Say too much shopping can overwhelm shoppers. They'd rather almost like not make a choice than make a choice, a bad choice. And if they do make a choice, they actually tend to be less satisfied with the choice they've made, because they're worried they've made a bad choice. There were so many options, there's almost like guesswork whether they got the right one or not. And they go home worried they've made the wrong choice. So the whole area of range and choice, etc., is again sort of maybe slightly counterintuitive. We think we want to empower shoppers and give them lots of choice, but actually reducing those options can often be the better option. That's a very quick sort of whiz round, sort of what shoppers and consumers are, and how we go about understanding their behaviour, and then how that leads to action. Finally, I want then to talk more about sort of marketing to shoppers, just very briefly, and we'll be covering this in the academy at the end of the month. What is shopper marketing? There is no one standard definition of shopper marketing. But the one I like to use is from a shopper marketing consultancy, which states shopper marketing is the process of understanding shoppers and using that understanding to develop a marketing mix which influences shopper behaviour in such a way as to positively impact consumption of the brand and or the category. So the key things there is shopper marketing is about understanding shoppers and then using that understanding to market to shoppers to influence their behaviour. At the Academy, we'll be looking about how we sort of create a framework to successfully influence shoppers along the path of purchase. It's important, a lot of the examples, a lot of activity will always be at shelf, but it's important that we think about sort of more integrated consumer shopper thinking and how we influence shoppers, you know, at home or out of the store when they get to the store, and then at the shelf. So here's a, I think a really good example, the manufacturer wanting to sort of increase consumption of laundry products by increasing regime usage, getting people to use a pre-wash treatment and a conditioner along as part of their regular wash. And then the whole campaign about that is creating sort of desire and awareness pre-store with this sort of, about making your clothes look better, stop your bottom sagging, but then in store making this much more about the product, discovering this anti-aging system for clothes, and then at shelf, then that's where we see the product. It's much more about, we've created the awareness pre-store, and it's much more about like converting the purchase at shelf. So we'll be looking at examples at the Academy about how we might go about increasing category consumption. So a couple of really good examples here. On the right-hand side, we've got one of using sort of tissues to get them into the back-to-school list, get kids taking tissues to school. On the left-hand side, we've got one for first aid dressings where most people are just buying the plasters, but actually having products alongside to cleanse the wound before you put the plaster on it, and then to help heal the wound as well. Very similar to the laundry regime product we just saw. We'll have examples about how they stimulate purchase. So on the left-hand side, a fairly simple example of putting together beer and crisps under the sort of a perfect match, and very much aiming at sort of maybe people watching football on TV, etc. On the right-hand side, I use this one a lot simply because it's an American example. I love it because I think America might be the only place that sells cheese in a can. Certainly it's not something that's common in the UK. I hope not in Sri Lanka. But this is a case of sort of putting the easy cheese, the cheese in a can next to the biscuits. So stimulating purchase there. Very simple examples. And then finally, these sort of reasons to buy, we've already seen the 100 calories or less. The one again from detergents where, very powerful messaging, very concise, wash colder, save up to 75% energy, really strong reason to buy at the point of purchase. Okay, so just to finish then, I wanted to talk very briefly about the Academy that's running at the end of February. The objectives of the Academy are really the things I've talked about today, really get people to be able to understand the difference and the relationship between consumers and shoppers and why shoppers become important. Understand the basics of shopper behaviour, quite a bit more than I've shown you today. We'll be looking at shopper missions, the consumer situation, the shoppers shopping for, and I'll go into more detail on some of the things I've shown. And we'll come on to talk about sort of buyer and sharp and how brands grow and first purchases and the implications for driving changes there. And then on the second day, we'll bring all of that together with this sort of the first approach to help people have a sort of a framework to develop strategy and tactics that can successfully influence shoppers in the direction of their category and brands. So it's running on the 21st, 22nd of February and the 24th, 25th. And as I say, day one, we'll be looking at shopper essentials, and day two will be all about shopper marketing. Okay, thank you. That looks like about half an hour dead on. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Barry, and appreciate sincerely. If we could get on to, oh, lovely, great. Kaushali, can we ask Rajiv to put everybody on screen?
Yes, we'll work on it, Dr. Hanta, as the conversation starts over.
Thank you. So can we quickly look at maybe a 1 to 2 minute view of Barry by the speaker? Ravi, you like to go first? Ravi, you're muted.
Ravi, you're muted. Ravi, you're on mute.
Yeah, so right. Okay, sorry. Thanks, Barry, for the wonderful presentation. And it was extremely useful from a sort of a marketing and sales point of view, brand building point of view. Just to give you a Sri Lankan context, we technically, by and large, the marketing people look after the consumers, and the sales or the customer people looks after the channels. So in between the shopper understanding, that is one of the reasons I've been talking to Barry also for a while, is that in countries like Sri Lanka, whether the company is big or small, understanding of shopper insights and converting into a brand building or business building activities are comparatively low when you're comparing definitely with Europe and the developed countries. So there's a huge knowledge gap. And within half an hour, I think Barry very clearly gave a very good insight what you can do with this shopper understanding, and it is amazing. So that's definitely, I know. And primarily before the program, we were thinking only on the FMCG, but it looks like in white goods and even in like say garments, because shopper is all over, so it is applicable. Around the one area perhaps we see this it is anywhere, not only the primarily the FMCG, across. He was showing the bar example, how to display and how to brand the kit of the barman. So these little insights goes a long way. So whether it's in FMCG, whether it's in general trade or modern trade, still Sri Lanka is by and large a general trade market. So it is pretty useful, and I'm sure the knowledge gap, if you continuously do this kind of programs with an expert of Barry's caliber, I think that will be very useful for the marketing fraternity. There's no question about it. Thanks, Barry.
Thanks, Ravi. Lavanya, you like to give a quick view of what you pick up from Barry, your insight?
Yes, so pretty much it's very relatable what he was talking about, even though coming from a more evolved shopper marketing sort of a background. Am I audible?
Yes, very clear.
Yes, very much, yeah.
So like he said, in Sri Lanka currently, the shopper marketing is mostly an evolving function. So most of the companies, like only a handful of companies, have a fully functioning customer marketing and a shopper department itself. So the first challenge I would say that a company would go through when focusing on shopper marketing is attracting the right kind of talent to run the department itself, because there's a very minimum literature on shopper marketing, and even when it comes to gaining more insights at the first moment of truth is very challenging. When it comes to research, also to get an understanding about the shopper behavior and what is actually influencing the shopper is very tricky. Most of the techniques that the shopper research would use, even like the eye tracking and the neuroscience, it's beyond budgets of most of the companies. So there we actually, as shopper marketeers, there's a huge gap in terms of getting these insights also into the table. And thirdly, I would say that the readiness of the creative agencies also in focusing on shopper marketing, because they're more specialized in consumer marketing, and there's very little differentiation between the communications, the shopper messaging that goes into the POB communication materials. And also like there's a lot of especially in modern trade, where you can actually have some sort of shopper marketing initiatives more than general trade, even though it's by and large about 20% of contribution, the FMCG. So most of the biggest chains, they don't share the secondary data with most of the companies. So it's very difficult to determine the sort of the effectiveness of shopper interventions that we do in the market. It's actually mostly sort of a guesstimate, like the understanding of the market, the industry experts. So there's actually a lot more to do in terms of the shopper marketing in Sri Lanka and in most of the companies, in my opinion.
Thanks, Lavanya. Rochana, you like to go in and give us your view?
Sure. Thank you for that. So first of all, thanks for having me also speak and give the perspective as well. As what Barry spoke of, I think it was very insightful in terms of some of those cues, some of those things that we need to consider when looking at from a shopper perspective. And I think from a workshop standpoint, I'm sure it's going to be a fantastic 2 days for those who are joining. Just my perspective also, I think Lavanya as well as Ravi spoke about, in terms of from the Sri Lankan standpoint, how does it work right now? We have a lot of, and Barry spoke about the consumer versus the shopper. I think the appreciation of consumer versus shopper and the nuances that the shopper needs to have in terms of the execution, in terms of the strategies, I think is a key point that as a fraternity, as an industry, that we are, I think right now in that transition phase where there's a lot of companies focusing on specific departments coming in for shopper and all that as well. So I think there's a lot of focus that's coming in, and there is a transition that's happening in the industry. And I think this will be very timely in terms of a discussion from an industry standpoint. So to me, I think again, the starting point, I think we spoke about this, but the appreciation of the differences between the shopper as well as from a consumer standpoint. And us as Fonterra, I mean, giving my personal viewpoint here from the experience that I have here is around the science behind shopper. And I think Barry spoke quite a lot about some of those coming in terms of the design thinking. And I think that those kind of things are definitely things that we as an industry need to adopt and move forward in bringing that science into it. And therefore, what are the things that we need to consider? What are the aspects? What are the considerations? What are the factors coming into shopper in really driving those strategies? So starting from the mindset of the shopper, why does he or she come into that outlet? The environment that they are in. At Fonterra, we don't call it channels anymore. It is not about channeling a product through an outlet. It is about an environment that we are in. So whenever someone comes into that environment, how do you, as the team that strategizes for the shopper, change and influence that behavior, change and influence an attitude for that person within that environment? So those kind of things also, I think there's a lot of work end to end. If you look at it, I think a lot of design thinking was spoken of. But from an end-to-end perspective, what do we look at from a classification standpoint for our outlets? There are so many nuances that each of these outlets, or what we call retail environments, could bring in, that there will be so many things that we could do to change up what are the strategies that we are going to kind of work on as well. So that's, to me, number one point. Again, number two, thereafter, how do we strategize? How do we look at translating some of those insights that we've got into action? We use simple tools like the 5Ps, which could kind of work, and what kind of product do we really drive into what kind of outlet type that we have selected. It's very different. We wouldn't sell everything to every outlet. It is something selective that we will do. What kind of promotions would attract the consumer that is coming into that particular outlet. In Sri Lanka, being a very GT heavy market as well, there are, as we said, a lot of nuances, a lot of differences that could come in each of those store types. So understanding that and really appreciating, what ticks the consumer is important. And I think some of the things that Barry spoke of also would be really useful. The last point for me was also, I think, a lot of design work, and I think Lavanya touched upon this as well. From a design thinking perspective, what is kind of the visual hierarchy? What people see colors more than words. That, I think, design element, again, we spoke of agencies, we spoke of that execution piece. I think that's something that as an industry we could impact and kind of streamline, and that's something, again, from the perspective of what Barry spoke, would be really important. What are those principles? What are those design principles that we should adopt? Sometimes we look at a consumer piece and think it will work at a shopper point. But however, there's a lot more behind that, because a lot more science behind that in order for it to be impactful at the point of purchase. So I think a lot of those that spoke of, that Barry spoke of, as well as some of the others, I'm sure that would be discussed in the workshop, would be extremely useful. But from that perspective, those are my three things. One is understanding and appreciating the differences and the nuances, spending time to understand that and really get that insight. The strategy that we would execute, and then more the design work as well that happens thereafter.
Thanks, Rochana. Fantastic. Mira, you like to share your view?
Yeah. So Barry, I was vigorously nodding through almost all that presentation. Thanks for the thinking. I'm very lucky that I have a fairly large customer category development team and a custom marketing team, almost the size of the marketing team now at Unilever Sri Lanka. We have been trying to employ the thinking, the latest thinking in our day-to-day operations, specifically because Unilever globally has said like designing for channel is probably is of the five one of the five fundamentals of growth that Unilever as a company pushes aggressively, and designing for channel has become center point thinking in our day-to-day work, and it is now shifting itself into the marketing thought process or the consumer thought process as well. So that's the first thing I want to say. We need the thought process to come into Sri Lanka. Second thing is, I think the entire understanding this Ehrenberg-Bass Institute thought process of evidence-based marketing that elevates some of the myths with regard to whether it's POP, how POP is deployed, call to actions, how it should be deployed, etc. I think as a country and industry, we need to bring in and ensure that we move to a more scientific thought process and develop categories as well. And while you were going on, I was just thinking about the multiple examples that can be given, live examples that can be given because of specific shopper understanding, shopper mission understanding, shopper insight understanding that we have done in Sri Lanka that has actually improved share positions, have improved category values of retailers as well, and of course for the company. So I think for whoever is getting into shopper marketing or anyone who has been in shopper marketing, I think this workshop that you are about to do would be a great starting point. Wish you all the best and wish the team all the best to carry it through.
Thank you. Thank you, Meera. So, I mean, if you were to look at some category insights and behavior right now, what we see, it's something very strange that happened during the pandemic, was that, you know, your average FMCG consumption, which is around about 51 metric tons per month. It just picked up to about 65 metric tons during the pandemic as per Kantar data. And now, of course, you know, that was, I think, mainly the second wave. And then, of course, third wave, again, it skipped. And then, of course, now it's coming down to about 60 metric tons per month, which happens with average per month kind of consumption, like what Barry was saying. You know, if you really want to increase sales, you have to increase consumption, and you know, it's very important to focus about the end consumer. So my question is, from the very eminent panel which is there, is how important is going to be this whole area of shopper marketing insights, because right now, you know, you tend to go into a supermarket, you know, you just go and pick up whatever that is important in your shopping list and you run away because of the first it was Delta and then it's Omicron. So the significance of merchandising and display is lesser. So what is your view on that, Miran?
First of all, the fundamental principles of what Barry is talking about don't change, because what people have to buy have to be bought somewhere, whether it is in e-com or in a channel or the proximity outlet. It doesn't really matter, but you have to buy whatever has to get bought. And so you have to think of each channel and the behavior of the shopper behavior in each channel as its own process. I see what COVID told us, but from the statistic that you just told, the volume didn't drop significantly. People can continue to buy irrespective of the fact that there is a lockdown. And I think, Doctor, there's we don't capture, I don't know whether we capture in definitive terms the volume that comes through e-com into a household, whether that happens very effectively. So I don't know. I don't think there would have been a drastic drop in the FMCG. So irrespective of the channel, the fundamentals still apply. You still have to understand the shopper mission into any listing, whether it's click or brick, and you have to design for that channel and that behavior and the mission. Yeah.
Rochana, what is your view? Consumption actually increased is what Kanta says, and even during the pandemic. But the question is that how important is it for you to understand shopper behavior at a retail end, given that, like what Meera was saying, you whatever you want to buy in your basket of goods, you are anyway going to buy, whether it be brick or click. Your view.
Thanks, Doctor. I think, as I was saying before, it is the fundamental, or it is the essence of it to me. I mean, before we go into strategizing a shopper or an execution piece, I think understanding and the, what kind of areas you have to look at in understanding what insights do we, pick up. I think there are lots of input points that in order for us to consider in terms of from the time the shopper walks in, I suppose. Can you hear me?
No, Roger, I think you are not very audible.
Yeah, you're breaking.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, very clear.
Yeah, better. Yeah.
Sorry about that. I think something's wrong with my connection. As I was saying, in terms of, different input points, I think different things to consider. Number one, from the retail environment, as we call, or the channel as what it's known for. What is the insight from the channel? What is the environment? What influences the shopper in each of those environments? When it comes to the shopper itself, why do they come in? What is kind of the purpose of that visit? What is their mission, shopper mission? All of that, I think, are roots of understanding and getting into some of those insights. And I think there are different tools, and I'm sure Barry would speak that as we go along. But how do we use those tools? Especially because it's a very GT heavy market, the data availability part of it. Looking at across Southeast Asian markets, we do have a lot of data available because it's a mini market kind of or a supermarket kind of output. And therefore, that kind of outlet level data and offtake data would help drive those insights. I think one barrier for us is that data that as an industry, as a country, that we would need to address. But again, going back to your point, Doctor, in terms of the insight, I think that's the fundamental of it. And it's important for us to identify, insights across all of those consideration points that we spoke of, whether it's a shopper, whether it's the channel, whether it is, the path to purchase, what is the decision-making hierarchy of that person, all of that.
Thank you, Rochana. Lavanya, what is your view of in terms of whether behavior has changed between pre-pandemic and during the pandemic and today? What is your view?
Okay. So in certain categories, Doctor, like we have observed, obvious shopper shifts that has happened. Like the behaviors have changed. Predominantly, the first lockdown was different to the second lockdown. So both the lockdowns, like the shoppers behaved in a different ways. So mostly what we observed in the first lockdown was that whoever who could influence the trader, like who could get into the outlet, they won. So because shoppers did not have much of access and browsing facility during the first lockdown. So whoever who, whatever the assortment that were available at the retail point, like they purchased. So here, something that we observed were like a lot of unknown brands and unfamiliar brands to the shoppers. It got trials. So there were several brands that, even for me personally, it was what was available in the outlet. It's not the particular brand that I have been continuously buying pre-pandemic. So this brand shift happened quite a lot during the lockdown. And some of the brands that the shoppers trial, they actually liked it. So it's the FMCG, like it's not much of a heavily involved categories that we have, right? So from what our understanding, like more brands came into the consideration of the shoppers. So post-pandemic, like when they were open to some level of browsing again, like they looked for offers. I mean, obviously, in a country where the price inflation is one of the highest in the region, shoppers went more towards the promotions, the consumer promotions, the price off and all that. So from out of the 3-4 brands that were in their consideration set, and who's been promoted at that time, that brand and the SKU had a better leverage over the other brands. So the promotion played a huge role. The soulless usership may have come down in certain categories, and dual usership have increased over the brands that they have trialed. And the other thing, like I think both Fortuna and Indira touched upon it, like where you place your product, like the browsing has come down significantly. So where your primary placement and in the aisle where you place your product, and in terms of the secondary placement also to get it picked up. And sometimes you have to influence the instant, like the spontaneous purchases that comes in. Like most of these, even though they come more prepared into the outlet than what they used to, so the planned mission is the up to the category level, and sometimes up to the brand level, the purchase decisions are taken pre-store. But how you influence into the categories at the point of purchase to drive that impulse is because like they are in a hurry. So the moment that you see offers and like attractive displays and all that, it's like they stop for a minute, and they could we could influence, shopper marketing can influence that. So in that, and also most importantly, the assortment that you carry. Sometimes even during the first lockdown, we saw like the average weight of purchase, the basket values went up because the shoppers were a bit of, and they were not so settled with whether it will be available when it comes to the next purchase also. But now most of them are like a bit cash strapped. So the SKU downsizing can happen to an extent. So all these things actually during the pandemic, the shopper behavior had changed to a greater extent in terms of the considerations and the trials that they generate and the average basket value that they owe, and the receptiveness of the consumer promotions and the prices. So yeah.
Thank you, Lavanya. Brilliant. I mean, you were like spot on, huh? Because latest research from Kantar says that 67% of the people who buy products are looking at price comparisons as the main reason for product search. So it's coming out price very clearly. And you're also right. Just at the pandemic, post the pandemic, or at least in the second lockdown, the average number of trips 2 dropped down to 6 for a month. So they would go buy a higher value into the basket, and then you're trying to see how you can protect yourself from germs. Ravi, your view of how important is this whole area of studying the shopper behavior in a pandemic environment, because of your experience in Coca-Cola and Unilever, and I mean, I know you've done extensive work in South Africa. Ravi, your view, apart from Melbourne?
Sort of my view, especially with this current situation, because if you take Sri Lankan context, I think across any category, not only FMCG, the due to inflation, the prices have gone up. So, but the consumer income, disposable income, is almost static. So you can see there is a severe in terms of rupee value depreciation. In that background, from a marketing side, take for example, if you are operating, I'll take a small example from Coke. Now, Coke is a multiple channel operation. So if you take like in biscuits, the number of channels in Sri Lanka is comparatively lower than if you take a beverage category. So in that context, the amount of money for marketing you spend and what you get return is somewhat, if you don't understand the shopper, if you cater to 10 channels and these 10 channels, the shopper behavior is different. And if you don't understand exactly why that shopper consume or buy your product, you may be wasting your money. So the more you understand at the point of purchase behavior or the point of consumption behavior, the shopper, you will be more targeting your spend. So somewhat, which we have seen, for example, the traditional media versus the digital, so sort of for e-commerce is now going up. So you can see a lot of changes. So we are going to an era where every rupee or every dollar you spend, where you look for sort of what is the best return you can get and what is the best impact you can make. So the more you understand the point of truth where the shopper buys your product or in a beverage thing, or you consume your product in a channel, so that you will be more targeting. I think it is coming so because most of the time when you run a promotion or when you try to do something pure point of sale material, the effectiveness, we really don't know whether it's 50% effective, 10%, like various examples you say. It's very obvious. If you don't understand the scientific background, you will be wasting a lot of money for sure. And end of the day, when you are wasting that money, who pays? The consumer pays for it, because there's no question about it. So the more you do, because we do a lot of things on lean management, we try to back end operational cost reduction, but the front end, I think it's very important, like the back end in today's context. So I think post COVID has given us a new, I think the survival of the fittest or the survival of the probably the smartest in terms of operations. So gone are the days that you can, trial and error kind of stuff, which can be very painful, because end of the day, any mistake you do, the pain we are giving to the consumer, and consumer is very knowledgeable, and she will select the brand which gives the highest value for her. So to give the highest value, you need to understand her, and not only as a consumer or as a customer, which we are pretty good. I think Sri Lanka is knowledge in that area is pretty good, but the shopper understanding is even sort of like one of the Barry's thing he was talking about the 8 words. As a simple example, shopper generally is 8 words, but if you take point of sale material in general, I think more than 70-80% are more than 8 words, or even packing. The Kellogg versus the other example. Even on the highways, you see the hoardings when you are driving at 80-100 kilometers per hour. The some hoardings are like newspapers, so you will not see anything. I think on a highway, people may be reading only 2 words. So you're just wasting your money. So I think that's some very appropriate, Barry, and of course that's why we were thinking going through whatever company you work for, a local company or a multinational, this particular knowledge, understanding the shopper mission and understanding the shopper at the point of sale is absolutely crucial, because end of the day, that's where you spend your money very carefully. Yeah.
Thanks, Ravi. Very interesting situation in Sri Lanka. The market is FMCG market, again by Kanta, is valued at about 310 billion. If you look at the 2020 and 2021 consumption against the pandemic, pre-pandemic, post or during pandemic, overall FMCG grew by 14%, while the year before it was degrowing at -3%. And if you look at F&B, it has grown by 15% at -4%. So there's absolute turmoil at the household end that was taking place, real disruption. And then even if you take the personal care, has grown by 12% in volume, while it was actually -3% the year before. Home care also grew by about 11%. But of course, it was growing the year before also by about 2%, but marginally. So we see a lot of change happening at the household end. And obviously that will also transcend into the kind of a dynamic change that's happening at the at the shopper end. So I suppose, your program will capture some of these dynamics as to how you can, kind of how companies can get sharper, like what Ravi was saying, that, you can spend better so that you tend to less waste your money on, Barry,
Sure,
you.
Rohantha, just sorry to interrupt you. One of the things we have seen after the last 2 years, of course, Melbourne also in our 70 years history, last 2 years was by far the best. But we see that now the shopper was not spending for travel earlier for school holidays. Now the schooling kids are going to school, traveling has started. So now since it's open up, you will see she's now spending for those. So overall, especially FMCG category, her spend will decline. That's for sure. We already got last week some very high strategies. It's really the last 2 years is history, and now things are very much different. So she will cut the 63% or whatever she has spent for FMCG to about 45. That's for sure, because we have seen it very clearly. When the country opens up, she has to cake that, because her income is the same, and now she's spending for these things, and then she cuts down. I have seen in the biscuit category very much. So must be for the other FMCG categories also the same. Yeah.
And Ravi, that is compounded by, of course, the contraction of disposable income because of the economic situation as well. So it's double whammy, and you are going to have a huge drop in volumes consistently.
Yes, that's happening across here.
The question, Barry, is that the question I was going to ask, Barry, is that given this input you see from these top end corporate personalities who are on this panel, you can see the kind of expectations that they're going to have on you when you come in. They would want to see some kind of insights that's going to give them a kind of an edge. Now, today, what you see is only the FMCG sector who is represented here, but then you also have a huge white goods business in Sri Lanka, like the Singers and the Abans of the world. And I was talking to the CEO of Singer. He was saying that a global expert from one of the rating companies had met him during the pandemic, and he said that the business is going to crash by 60%. But Singer ended up with a growth just like double digit. It's one of the best years that Singer had. So things have changed. So what can we expect from you, Barry, on the 21st?
I wondered where that question was going. I think just before I answer that question, just a couple of things. Whilst you've been talking, one of the things I found really interesting is almost everything you've just said about Sri Lanka, I would say, could be applied to the UK at the moment. So I don't think there's any differences. So those trends in FMCG, it's shot up during the pandemic. It's going down now, and there's really high inflation kicking in, which is going to get a lot worse in the coming months, which is causing all sorts of problems with disposable income and what people are projecting. I think the conversations you were having about change and the pandemic were really interesting. As I think one of the things that happens, as you're probably aware, a lot of my work is about, my company is about first purchases, but first purchase is when change happens. It's when someone buys something that they haven't bought before. So it's a change in shopper behavior. So if you really sort of look at disaggregating what's happened in the pandemic, I think, Lavanya, you were talking about a lot of people were trying brands they hadn't bought before. Exactly. So they were making sort of a first purchase of a brand for whatever reason, maybe their usual brand was out of stock or why. And some of those people would have liked that brand and will buy it again and will buy it again. So, some won't. They'll go back. But I think it's when you think about that sort of change in behaviour, the way I like to think about it is almost like trying to disaggregate it, because it's a lot of individuals making changes, very small changes, one at a time. I think we're seeing quite a lot of things returning to normal, but the fact that sort of a lot of people say trial e-com for the first time during the pandemic means that e-com will be bigger coming out of the pandemic, because some people would have liked it, would have thought that, you know, that's a nice way to shop, and we'll carry on doing so. In terms of what people can expect from me, I think actually just savaged global experts in terms of making very dodgy forecasts for your friend. I think what what I will be delivering is the sort of some basic understanding or the sort of principles, foundational understanding of a sort of shopper behaviour that hasn't changed during the pandemic. There might be sort of more of it, of some sorts of behaviours, and less of some sort of other behaviours, but that behaviour will still be there. So I'll be walking through or illustrating that sort of behaviour. And critically, when we come on to the sort of how to influence that sort of behaviour, what I can bring is, or what I'll be bringing is an approach that almost tries to sort of, if not guarantee success, really give brands a better chance of success by adopting that approach. So that, you know, that approach is based on sort of focus, looking at the idea for growth and really double checking that is an idea which is you're going to take to shoppers and consumers that will generate growth. Then it's looking very much at behavior change, the really difficult bit, but what's the behavior change we require? What are the barriers to making that happen? What are the triggers to making it happen? What are the shoppers? You know, it's interesting that sort of I didn't talk much or at all about mission and channel, but I will be talking a lot about mission and channel. I was very interested about your design for channel. I work with Unilever globally quite a lot, and it's very hard to have a conversation without the words design for channel creeping up quite quickly. And then finally about sort of, you know, activation and how you build. I'll be using the sort of words mental availability and physical availability along the path to purchase. So most of all, what I'm trying to do is give people some core understanding, but then really a strong framework to apply that understanding so that they've got a better chance of success of influencing shopper behaviour.
Thank you, Barry.
Thanks,
I mean, what you said is, I mean, amazing, because I'm going back to Kanta. There were about 3.5 million internet use searches purchased online during this study, and it came out that 2.8 million happened to be from the urban markets, and 4.5 million happens to be from the rural market. So there's been a huge drastic change in the way people look at things. They're very entrepreneurial, and like what was mentioned, there were many trialist study came, but I don't know what the retention levels are. I mean, I'm not privy to that data, but it will be interesting to see what impact it had in terms of overall consumption versus in terms of increasing penetration. But penetration had grown during the pandemic is what comes out. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think we need to close now. Thank you so much for this excellent discussion that we had. And Ravi, I think you're doing a fantastic service to the country in terms of actually bringing in and introducing Barry into the country. And I've told the team in Appit also that this will be a zero profit venture for the country. It's going to be a service totally for the country that will be done. And in fact, right now the discussions are on that Sri Lankan Airlines will bring down Barry and his wife to the country so that we keep the total cost at the bare minimum. So I think what's important is to see what kind of outcomes you're going to have. So thank you very much. And Kaushali, over to you. Thank you so much, Kaushali, for organizing everything at the Appit end. You've done a fantastic job all this time and bringing down all these top speakers. So Kaushali, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doctor. Ladies and gentlemen, that is Dr. Rohan Tatukorala, Board Director of Appit Sri Lanka, pioneering this project Inspiration with an eminent panel together today to create much valuable learning engagement. And Mr. Barry Lemmon, founder of First Purchase Research London. So we sincerely thank you for sharing your expertise today with a global view about shopping behavior. It's amazing insights that we were listening to today. I'm sure that will be very supportive and informative to the students. And Mr. Ravi Jayawardena, as always, it's amazing to see you in the platform. being our group CEO of Maliban Biscuits Manufacturers. And thank you so sincerely for this gratitude from all of us for initiating this project and effort, and bringing this down to Sri Lanka with FMCG leaders. And of course, Rochana from Fontera Brands, and then Lavanya from Hemas Consumer Brands, along with Mihira joining us from Unilever Sri Lanka. Thank you for bringing your insights today as well. So with that, we come down to an end of a very successful end of another session and another learning opportunity, another inspiration for our young students listening to us and our young entrepreneurs wanting to be just like you one day. So with that, we will meet back again in another session. And until then, do take care of yourselves and stay safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you, Rashid. Thanks.
Thanks,
Bye.
Thanks, Barry. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thanks,
Okay.
Ravi. Bye.
Thanks. Thanks.